So lovely to see you all. I'm going to start by sort of taking you up as far as we've got now by sharing my screen. So that we had started with Eve, went on to Rebecca, Rachel and Leah followed on from Rebecca. And these are your suggestions for things that they might say to subsequent generations of women. So Rachel sits weeping for her children. She said, "Give me children or else I die." It is only through our children that we are remembered. It is only through age and experience that bitter jealousies can be reconciled. Okay. Leah would say, "Do not depend on men. Trust in God and the power of prayer. Remember who you are and stand up straight." Serach bat Asher was a mother in Israel. She used to say, "Remember, and as you remember, bear witness to what you have seen and know." That's perhaps only one, except there are three elements to it. So I think we'll just about get away with it. But if there are any more suggestions for Serach bat Asher, I'd be very grateful. Now we're jumping, having sort of focused very much on the matriarchs. We are now jumping to the period of the kings, and in particular to David. And the story of Michal, his first wife. So did you all get the text? That was the first question. Yes, that's excellent. Good. So, I mean, essentially, Michal's story begins when we're looking at the story of David and Goliath. So if we look at that first text, it basically says, the men of Israel were saying, "Do you see that man coming up? He comes to defy Israel." That is Goliath. "The man who kills him will be rewarded by the king with great riches. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and free his father's house in Israel." Now, if you have read on, you will know what happens. But just to go back, so you have a little bit of the sense of a family tree. You have Saul's sons were Jonathan and Ishvi. Actually, it's interesting. This is one of the places where the editor has actually changed the name. The name of Saul's son was Ishbosheth. And it seems to be changed because that basically Bosheth is shame, the man of shame. And here they change it to Ishvi. Malchishua, and the names of his two daughters were Merav the older and Michal the younger. So before we go on, anything strike you about those two passages? Claire? Claire, you're unmuted, so I don't know whether you would say something.
Sorry. Yeah, no. Yeah, well, the name of the daughters, suddenly they are almost important as the boys, right?
Well, yes, they are. They are, actually. They are, because they are significant in the story of Saul and David. Anything else that sort of kind of strikes you if you look at the two passages together? Okay, I shall tell you. It said
his daughter, and he has two daughters. So
exactly,
which of the daughters?
Exactly, it doesn't specify. Mark?
Wouldn't you normally expect the older daughter to be the one that was given?
Absolutely. Do you sort of sense a familiarity here? Yeah, okay. Would you like to specify what that familiarity is?
Well,
We've seen this, I'm sorry, after you.
no, you were talking.
No,
Sorry.
no, you go, you're cleverer than I am.
No,
You're
no,
too polite.
Rachel and Leah. But here,
Absolutely.
well, I won't jump ahead.
Okay, no, right. Okay, so let's look at that main text here, which we relate to, which is 1 Samuel 18, okay? Saul said to David had just killed Goliath, okay? And Saul said to David, behold my elder daughter Merav, I will give her to you as a wife. Only be brave for me and fight the Eternal's battles. Before Saul said, let not my hand be upon him, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him. What does he mean by that? This is a very old-fashioned translation. What does that mean? Don't let my hand be upon him, but let the Philistines.
I won't be the one to kill him.
Exactly, but I want him killed, essentially. But I want him killed. So he's not happy, having promised his daughter to the person who kills Goliath. He's a little bit horrified that this, 18-year-old boy, shepherd from nowhere, has suddenly done this. And so rather than giving his daughter to, a great general, as he kind of expected, it's to this nobody. And here it specifies also, it is his older daughter, Merav, who is going to be his wife. Okay. So, and David said to Saul then, who am I? What is my life or my father's family in Israel that I should be the son-in-law to the king? Okay. And so it came to pass at the time when Merav, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel, the Meholite, as a wife. Okay. So rather than being given to David, she's married off to someone else. But then Saul discovers Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David. And they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. And Saul said, I will give him her, as she may be a snare to him, and that the hands of the Philistines may be against him. Okay? Now you have to be aware now that Saul is already caught in huge jealousy of David. David killed Goliath. The women have been singing, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his 10,000s. When David says, who am I that I should be son-in-law to the king? It's positioning him into the royal family and knowing what the sort of kind of, kings were like in those days and, who succeeded who and how they did. I think there's something in that, that line of David's, which suggests that he's ambitious. He's an ambitious boy. So anyway, he is now, Saul sees that in Michal's love for David, a chance to get David to become reckless in his dealings with the Philistines, and hope that for Michal's sake, David will be killed. Okay. So Saul said, and Saul said to David, you shall be my son-in-law through the second instead today. And Saul instructed his courtiers to say to David privately, the king is fond of you and all his courtiers like you. So why not become the king's son-in-law? And when the king's courtiers repeated these words to David, David replied, do you think that becoming the son-in-law of a king is a small matter when I am but a poor man of no consequence? And Saul's courtiers reported to him, this is what David answered. And now what is meant by that is, I'm a poor man, I can't pay the bride price for the daughter of a king. The mohar, as it's called in Hebrew, that, yes, she comes with a dowry, and it would have been a substantial dowry, but in order, there was always a negotiation that the husband would have to pay his father-in-law to take the woman off his hands. So being, a king, being a princess, the bride price would be huge, and David wouldn't be able to afford it. So you would think that maybe, Saul, having said he would give his daughter to whoever killed Goliath, would waive the price. Well, he does sort of, but not entirely, because the king then says, say this to David, the king desires no other bride price than the foreskins of 100 Philistines as vengeance on king's enemies. Saul intended to bring about David's death at the hands of the Philistines. And when his courtiers told this to David, David agreed. Before the time had expired, David arose and went, he and his men, and slew 200 of the Philistine men. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full number to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him Michal, to his daughter, to wife. And Saul saw and knew that Adonai was with David, and Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. Okay? So, how did that story strike you?
I feel like there's a lot of mirroring of other stories going on, and I'm not entirely sure I'm picking up on all of them, but doesn't Saul protest similarly to the prophet Samuel when he, and then also it seems to be mirroring Genesis as well. And are the foreskins impure? Is there some foreshadowing here also of the language that will be used for David and Bathsheba and his love of collecting beautiful things, entrapping him? I don't know.
That's interesting and very possible. Very possible. When you say Genesis, can you be more specific?
Is it 39, 40? I'm not sure. I can look it up.
Don't mind, but you're talking about the stories of Rachel and Leah. Yeah. So that's what I mean. Yes. But there's similarities and differences. Can anyone sort of explain what are the similarities? What are the differences? Well, the similarities, of course, are the fact it's two sisters. But the difference is, whereas the first one, here he was meant to marry the elder and ends up marrying the younger. Whereas with Jacob, he intended to marry the younger and ended up marrying the older. So there is, and very much you get this theme that goes through the whole of Tanakh, which of measure for measure, midah keneged midah. That one story which does not seem to resolve itself in some way is kind of reflected later in a way that does resolve itself. The editors of the Torah were very conscious of the role that each individual plays in the story of the creation of the nation of Israel. Jacob is Israel. And, as such, he is the founding father. His story has lots of loose ends in it, which gets sort of solved in many different ways. But this story of Rachel and Leah is kind of left, it is possible, yes, that they were reconciled in the end. It is possible that he and Esau were reconciled in the end, but there are question marks about both. When you come to David, David is in a sense the new Israel. This is the ideal king, the king par excellence. He becomes the ancestor of the Messiah. And so in a sense, things that didn't quite resolve themselves within the story of Jacob have to resolve themselves in the story of Esau. So this relationship of the two sisters is a deliberate sort of harking back to Jacob. It's a pointer that, David is a parallel to Jacob. So just as Jacob is a founder, so is David a founder. David's a founder of the royal line that is going to become the significant one.
Most of them paid twice for the bride, right? Jacob
Yes.
worked 14 years and he paid, David
Yes.
paid 200.
Exactly, absolutely. And neither of them paid the conventional bride price.
Yeah.
Neither of them could afford to, because Jacob was a fugitive and David was a shepherd. Okay, but and the other aspect of that is in a sense the counting, the number. 7 years followed by another 7 years. So you're counting through those years to get to the end. With the foreskins, counting through 200 foreskins takes some of the time, so there is a definite connection going on there. The foreskins also hark back to the story, I'm sure, of
Dinah's brother.
Dinah. Exactly. The story of the rape of Dinah is that, oh dear, I can't remember now his name, who it's the son of Abimelech, the king, who in Shechem falls in love with Dinah, rapes her, and then asks Jacob for her hand in marriage. Jacob sort of receives him along with two of his sons, Shimon and Levi. And they negotiate that, yes, he can marry her, providing he and all of the Shechemites are circumcised, because that is a requirement, for the tribe of to be part of or to be associated with the tribes of Jacob. And they agree. He agrees. And he goes and he and all the men of Shechem are circumcised. And as the Bible puts it, while they are recovering from the operation, Simeon and Levi go in and murder the lot. Now, this is seen as the reason why essentially the tribe of Judah becomes the leading tribe. Reuben proves his unworthiness through sleeping with Jacob's concubine. Also, the earlier stories, the stories of Joseph that we're looking at the moment, starting this week, shown to be a fairly ineffective character, whereas Judah, who stands up at the end of the story of Joseph, is much more efficient. So you can argue that he would be more likely to become a sort of, take the leadership role. But again, it's one of those things of sort of harking back on resolutions. David, as being one of the tribe of Judah, is kind of sort of justified by looking back at those stories, of the rape of Dinah and seeing the unworthiness of Shimon and Levi to take those leadership roles. And so he becomes, and so that's why probably foreskins are sort of kind of referred to in this story. Okay, any thoughts, comments?
It is quite clear that the author likes David, it doesn't like Saul, because, well, Saul was amazing few chapters ago, and now he became such an evil man,
Yeah.
really not thinking well, not wishing well, very nasty man, not pleasant.
Yeah. Jazz.
Is-
Mark.
Yeah, is there a possible parallel with the story of David and Jonathan, who become related, of course, through marriage, and Jacob and Esau, and they all end up crying on each other's shoulders, sort of thing. Is that a literary?
It is possible. I haven't sort of picked up on the sort of literary connections there. at all. But I mean, I haven't studied the whole sort of David saga in enough depth to really answer that. It's possible, but I couldn't say for sure. There are interesting other sort of kind of parallels. I mean, there is the jealousy between Saul and David. Saul, you know which tribe he comes from?
Benjamin,
Benjamin.
because Judges and Judges 19, and yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you know, there's yes. If you read the end of the book of Judges, again, you will see why the Benjaminites as a whole are considered unworthy to become the leaders of the people. Saul himself gives up that by failing to kill Amalek, you know, on God's orders that all of the Amalekites should be killed. So sorry, not Amalek, Agag, the king of the Amalekites, who he was instructed by Samuel to kill, and he didn't. So as a result of that, we are plagued, according to the story, with, you know, the seed of Amalek ever since. But Saul was considered at this point to forfeit his right to the throne. And David sort of waiting in the wings to do so. So there's another aspect, though, that is kind of interesting. And again, oh, right, Christy, you want to say something?
It was Joseph, the end of 39, where, you know, he's been accused of rape and he's put in prison, but it's like, but Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh was with him. And, you know, so it's like this concluding total underdog, everything looking bad, but don't worry, like Adonai's with him. You know that the underdog is like actually going to triumph and the covenant's going to continue.
Yeah, yeah. That is that pattern all the way along. It's the youngest, it's in a sense the youngest son. I mean, David is the youngest of 6.
Oh, sorry, I was
Sorry,
going to
no,
say
sorry.
8.
It is 8, sorry, it is 8.
And so
is
then
8.
he
You
could
know?
never have like afforded the bride price anyways.
No,
So he is poor in that sense. So in a sense, the whole ruse of the schmucks is like, well, that's the only thing he could have afforded anyway, because he wasn't going to inherit anything.
Yeah. But, you know, it's very clear that Saul's demand for 100 foreskins was not that he wanted 100 foreskins, but he wanted rid of David. And okay, Francis.
It feels like there are so many red flags in this story, even up to this point, though.
Yeah.
Because Saul clearly doesn't want to give his daughter away to this particular man. So first he haggles him down to, no, you'll get the other daughter, the inferior second daughter. And then David says, oh, but I can't afford it, which I read either as, oh, but I can't afford it. Can't you maybe go down with the price a little bit? I don't know. Yes. Or he's saying, no, please don't. Please keep your daughter. I can't afford it. I don't want her.
Yes, yeah.
And then he says, well, and Saul sort of starts escalating the, please be killed by the Philistines.
Yes.
Which ends in David killing twice as many people and mutilating their corpses. I mean, no matter how evil they are, but I found that a bit questionable from today's perspective. And through all of this, Michal is the only one who actually likes David.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
But it doesn't say he likes her.
No,
beloved
no point.
David.
That's the whole point. And note, we are told twice that he loves her. Mark.
Yeah, it also doesn't say that. Saul says, all right, because you love him, I will give him to you, I will give you to him. At no point. It's like, I don't know. It's not off to a very good start.
It's not up to a very good start, and it gets worse. Mark.
Yeah, I was just thinking there's a kind of reverse chiasmus going on, I think, because David sends out Uriah to get killed so that he can have Bathsheba.
Yes, it's absolutely. That is so, yeah, that's exactly right. So
okay. Yeah, and while we're skipping ahead in the story, since I see this is not on here, in 2 Samuel 21:8, whose kids die? Is it Michal, because in the very first one we read, or second one,
Right.
where
We
in
will,
this
we
one
will,
it says
we will
that-
go there. We will go there.
we will talk about it.
We
Okay.
will talk about that because that comes in. Well, actually, whose kids died? Surely it's Bathsheba's first child who died.
Well, in 2 Samuel 21:8, either when he agrees to give up 7 of the descendants of Saul, either Michal's 5 children born to
Yes.
Adriel are murdered, or it's Merab's. And
Yes.
would
Yeah, we are going
is
there.
it?
We are going there. We are going there. So that is skipping really ahead. So we will get there. So where were we? Yes. So Michal, we are told twice that Michal loves David. He's the only woman in Tanakh who is said to love someone. Except perhaps Shir Hashirim, Song of Songs, but that's kind of slightly different. Why do you think we're told twice? All right, I'll just say, I think the second time, doesn't that sort of pinpoint? What about Jonathan? What about David? Doesn't say, as Christy pointed out, doesn't say that David loved her.
But in parallel, we can say that it was mentioned that Jacob loved Rachel. It wasn't
Yes.
mentioned the other way around. So
That's absolutely true. That is absolutely true. And again, it's mentioned twice, or it doesn't mention, yeah, it is mentioned twice. First time that he loved her,
at
then
least twice.
and then, so you're absolutely right. It is a parallel there. I think though, it does question that thing is, okay, so who does David love? And who does David love?
Himself.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing.
Jonathan. He loves Jonathan. That's what we are told, that he loved Jonathan.
Because when he comes back, he meets Jonathan, but he doesn't meet Michal, even though she's the one that saved his life.
Absolutely. And he doesn't call for her when he leaves. He just disappears. He doesn't see him. He marries 2 other wives in between, which we'll have a look at, in a bit. So he loves Jonathan. Now, Jonathan and Merav are brother and sister. Go back to Rachel and Leah, and you've got another parallel there of, of having the beloved wife and the other one. And here it's the beloved friend and the other one. Just seeing the Elizabeth's, let's see, just shown a chat. I can't find my chats at the moment. Here we go. All right. Oh, sorry. I hope you're here listening anyway. So that's good. You're here. So yes, so there is some, there is still another connection, I think, to the whole of the Jacob story. These connections go through the whole story about Michal. But the question is, she loves David. She's possibly, as Claire said, the only person who loves David. But he doesn't seem to think much of her. Okay. As we see in the next passage, which we've got here, which is Samuel 19, this is basically after the many times that Saul is, really gets so jealous of him and has thrown a spear at him, tried to kill him. And now at this point, Saul has sent messages to David's house to watch him and to kill him in the morning. Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, "If you do not save your life tonight, tomorrow you shall be killed." So Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped. And Michal took the teraphim and laid them on the bed, and put the pillow of goat's hair at its head, and covered it with a cloth. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, he said, "He is sick." And Saul sent the messengers again to see David, saying, "Bring him up to me in the bed, that I may slay him." And when the messengers were come in, behold, the teraphim were in the bed, with a pillow of goat's hair at its head. And Saul said to Michal, "Why have you deceived me so and sent away my enemy, that he escaped?" And Michal answered Saul, "He said to me, 'Let me go. Why should I kill you?' So David fled and escaped, and came to Samuel to Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and dwelt in Imahot. Okay. Now again, lots of parallels there. Would someone like to tell me what?
Rachel does the same thing, hiding from Laban, although Laban doesn't find them.
Yep. So again, it's the same and different. Exactly the same thing. She hides the teraphim. Now, it's interesting. What are these teraphim? They are understood to be household gods. Now, in the story of Rachel and Laban, she steals Laban's teraphim, which is okay because Laban is a baddie and an idolater. And the fact that she sits on them is sort of very much a sort of indication of where the writer is coming from, that it's not, to make kind of mock these things. But this is David's house. What's he doing with teraphim? Okay, now, probably he wasn't doing anything with them. And this is kind of inserted into the story to make sure you see that parallel of Rachel and Michal here. Michal is saving David's life. Rachel is actually, I don't know what she's saving her own life. But the point is that in both of them, both Rachel and Michal are faced with a father and a husband who basically hate each other and have to make a decision as to which one they're going to support. And, with both of them, they support their husbands. Both of them lie to their fathers. And both of them actually enable their husbands to escape. Because Laban can't find the teraphim, he goes home and Jacob is able to leave with his family. And of course, David disappears. But the difference is Jacob goes with his family and David goes alone.
Sorry, but wouldn't that be expected from women? Because as soon as you're married, you're part of your husband's family in a way. So you would take precedent over your father, or in cases like that, because her father, essentially Saul, did give her to David. So from then on, basically her duty and her loyalty would be to him, wouldn't it?
You would think so, yes. Yes, you're right. There are later on in the stories, what's interesting is how she's often described. She's usually described as the daughter of Saul. This is the only case, I think, where she's called the wife of David, which is appropriate in this context. But yeah, I think it's Alex, Christy wanted to say something first, and then, yeah.
Oh, it's okay, Mark, go ahead.
No, Christy, go.
I was just gonna, I may be wrong, but, well, I mean, she does go back to Saul, right? Because if she becomes a widow or he leaves, because Saul then marries her off again, but isn't that part of the problem with Tamar in Genesis, that, with the Levirate marriage not being fulfilled, she then is a widow.
You're going ahead of us again. You're going ahead of us again. So
I just meant, like, in the context of ancient Israel, if your husband dies and you're not given to a brother, don't you then revert back to your father?
Well, yes, you would. Yes, you would. Yeah. Okay, Mark.
Yeah, just going back to the idols. If they're not David's, then presumably they're Michal's or her family's. Is that a sort of an anti-Saul thing slipping in here?
That's an interesting idea. I haven't thought about that, and it maybe maybe it is.
Yeah. I mean, they're in the house.
Or
Did she
it-
bring them
or
with
it-
her because she knows where they are and goes to them?
Or, I mean, the other alternative, which people have said, is, if you look at the archaeological evidence, all these little clay figurines, if you go to the Israel Museum or whatever, they're all these tiny sort of clay figurines with enormous breasts and not much else by way of features. And there are so many of them have been dug up all over Israel, way too many to say that these are Canaanite. They have to have been part of Israelite households as well, because they're just too many.
I'm
Were they
convinced that Israel was
fertility figures?
Sorry, Mark first, and then Alex.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm convinced that Israel was monolatric rather than monotheistic at that time.
yes, I think that's right. I think that's absolutely true. Yes. Right, Alex. Sorry, what were you going to say? Sorry, I keep saying Alex. It's Christy. I'm sorry.
Okay. Were they? That sounds like fertility figures, because both
Yes.
Rachel struggles with infertility, right? But
Yeah.
depending on how we read later in the story, is Michal
Well, that is a rabbinic interpretation.
Okay.
Is that this is a fertility? Is this a fertility is to help with her fertility? That is reading back from the story. Exactly how the rabbis talk about it. But what is clear is that the teraphim here, and it looks like there's only one of them, although it's in the plural. But it's only one of them put in the bed, really, to look like David is sleeping there, and covered with or put with goat's hair. What does that remind you of? Claire is nodding. What's it?
Yes, to me, the story reminded the escape of Jacob from Esau. So,
Yes.
and Rebecca, who is helping him, it reminded me from the start, but with the goat.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's again another deliberate sort of, focus on that Jacob story. And of course, again, deceit. That Jacob, having sort of goat skins on his hands, deceives his father. Having this goat skin as hair, on top of the idol, this deceives the men, who think that it's David sleeping there. So there are, again, these very deliberate sort of kind of parallels. But what we're really looking at is Michal. This is our, she's the figure for today. How would you describe her, what we know of her so far?
loving and loyal and brave.
And manipulative.
Sorry?
Manipulative.
Manipulative. That's interesting. Why would you say that?
Well, she's helping David to escape by making up a story.
Yes, that's true. She does. It's interesting, when she's asked afterwards, why did she let him escape? She basically says, well, he threatened to kill me. Now, I mean, David isn't shown in a great light, as we know. And in fact, I think if you read this whole series of David is not a great character, at all. But I'm not sure he was kind of, a wife beater, whether he would actually, however much he may be indifferent to Michal. The thought that he would threaten to kill her if he didn't, if she didn't help him escape, doesn't, I think, ring true. So I think she was lying at that point, probably quite clearly. Yeah.
She takes initiatives that often involve a risk.
Yes.
That's
She's
all
the
that
one. Yeah, and she's the one in control of the story here. She's the one who tells David what to do.
Also, she is saying to the Malachim that he's sick to start with. So
Yes,
it is very clear that
yes.
she is.
Yeah. Yes, she's the one who seems to have made up the whole thing, and she's in control of it. And she's the one who, saves David's life single-handedly, really. He might have leapt out of the window himself, but it seems to be that it was her idea. Of course, what he does though then is he disappears and leaves, does not, and hides, does not send for her. Doesn't actually, as far as we know, ever say thank you. What he does do is he goes and he starts a sort of protection racket down by the Dead Sea. He and his band of sort of mates manage to, firstly, every so often hire themselves to the Philistines in order to attack Israel. At other times, he just basically, he would go up to local landowners and sort of say, we are hungry, we need food, you're going to feed us, aren't you? Because if not, we will basically destroy your place. Mark.
So just one more thing, this letting down from the window thing, Rahab is
Yes.
going through my mind,
Oh, that's an interesting one. I hadn't thought about that as a
there's
sort of connection
people always get let
with
down from
Joshua,
windows.
yes. Yes, the sheets, but yes, that's interesting, yeah. Yes, that is an interesting one, yeah. So anyway, so David basically with his men had this protection racket going, and if you were part of the 7 prophetesses, you will know the story of Abigail. But of course, he ends up marrying her. He in fact marries 2 women, Abigail and Ahinoam. Okay, and they become, his wives all the time. Michal is stuck at home. That is until, as you will see in 1 Samuel, this is the end of the story of Abigail. Then that's chapter 25. And Abigail rose quickly and mounted an ass, and with 5 of her maids and attendants, she followed David's messengers, and she became his wife. Now, David had taken Ahinoam of Jezreel, so both became his wives. So, the story with Abigail basically is that her husband, Nabal, is one of these people who David approaches to say, feed me or I will destroy you. And basically, Nabal says to him, go away, I don't want anything to do with you. Abigail hears this, is not very happy with it, and basically goes to David all dressed up in her finery and kind of flirts with him and basically says, my husband's an idiot, don't listen to him, here's the food, I'll look after your troops. And then says to him, don't forget me, basically, very, very sort of suggestively, it would seem. And he doesn't. And when Nabal dies, which he does do shortly afterwards, David marries her. But David had already married Ahinoam. Now, of course, this is a time for polygamy. So the fact that he's already married to Michal is not, such a big deal that he's now marrying other people. He's, alone in the desert, no chance of seeing his wife. So why not marry a few more? But then Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Palti, son of Laish from Galim. Okay. Now, that is more not possible because according to Jewish law, if it was available at that time, is one wife cannot have more than one husband at a time. So, what was the justification? Was it desertion? Was, as the rabbi suggests, a divorce, that Saul made David divorce her before he went, although it's quite hard to know how, since his leaving was not sort of exactly planned. Although there's another reason that, the rabbinic forceful divorce is because if David had died as Saul had intended, the levirate marriage would mean that she would then have had to marry one of his 8 brothers, which of course Saul would not have liked. So that might be a good motivation to get him to divorce. Any sort of thoughts about that?
I mean, if Saul is king at this point, can he just sort of manipulate those laws in any one of those directions to try and
Absolutely.
block David from taking the kingship and having a claim to the throne through her? So by
Exactly.
whether or not, if he can't kill David, and David's like, as the 8th son, is kind of a nobody, well, apart from his military prowess, but if he can cut off that connection with Michal by marrying her off, then maybe it doesn't matter whether or not it was strictly legal.
Exactly. Right, Francis.
Also, since they didn't have any children at that point, who could have proven that the marriage actually took place? So
Yeah, that is absolutely right. And there is this hope, you know, that she would have children with Palti, and that would then nullify, as it were, the marriage with David. You know, because there's no issue, so that would be possible. But what is happening? I mean, you know, Saul is playing a very political game here. He doesn't like David. He knows that David has his eye on the kingship. He's going to block him whatever way he can. He tries to kill him. That doesn't work. So another way is to cut him off from, you know, from any claim that he might have to being, you know, to being part of the royal family. And we don't basically know who this Palti is, but he becomes Michal's wife. Now, what do you think Michal will have thought about this?
Well, we know that she loved David.
Exactly. So, I mean, her feelings have no, you know, are not considered here.
That seems like a contrast to Genesis, where we saw many of the matriarchs have a strong role. I mean, on the one hand, as someone said, she does have this Rebecca-like role with the goat hair, but in contrast to some of the other matriarchs in Genesis, she doesn't, nobody asks her how she feels about it.
Nobody asked Leah either. You know, I mean, in a sense, again, it's part of that whole sort of kind of political situation. You know, women are chattels, and they are, you know, a valuable commodity that can be used and negotiated and married off. And I mean, of course, that is the whole royal thing. You know, Solomon did it to excess, but you know, David did it too. You know, that you marry people in order to establish the right sort of connections. You marry off your daughters to the right people.
She does feel like, I'm glad you brought up Leah, because she does feel almost, maybe because I'm an oldest, she does feel like Leah more than Rachel, maybe a little bit, because she's unloved.
She doesn't have children, except she doesn't have children. So there's still,
she doesn't,
you know,
but she's unloved, and she gets bitter and feel bad for her.
Yes. Sylvia.
I just wonder why sometimes Michal is spelled with a K and sometimes.
All right. Okay. I can tell you that I mean, this is, I've taken the translations from Safaria, and it's really interesting. They use different translations here. They're not their own translations, and some are very old and old-fashioned. I have tried, where I remembered, changed the these and thous to you and yours, but I missed a few, I noticed. In other places, they've got a much more modern translation, so they're not even in their translation. If I had more time, I would translate these texts myself, but I just never, I never seem to quite have the time to do it.
Yeah, that's fine. I was just,
you know,
wondering if
so,
it's the same
well, you know,
person.
because you know, it's a chaf in and there is a standard transliteration which would be KH, but a lot of people don't use it, and they use CH because we're more familiar with it, and words such as loch, you know, that's why. Mark.
you remember that famous chapter by Erich Auerbach, where he talks about these stories being fraught with background, and it's what's not said that really evokes the response.
Yeah.
I just find myself wondering that, the fact that so little is said about Michal's response and how people would have hearing those stories would have responded to that as well. What did she feel? I wonder how women, the earliest hearers of this story would have felt about what was being done to women.
Yes. I have exactly the same sort of feelings about that. We don't know. That's the frustrating thing. That's why we do this sort of Pirkei Imahot. We don't know. She is part of the canon, of women figures, biblical figures. But we have no access to women's literature until relatively recently. It's very clear that if you want to be remembered, you should write a book, because it's what's written down seems to be preserved. Oral traditions don't seem to be preserved. And clearly there was a very rich oral tradition amongst women, but we have very little of it, very little of it. I'm sure, personally, I think a lot of what comes through in Midrash was probably preserved by women, but there's no way of knowing for sure. There's no way we can actually say, unless there was a sort of hard and fast literary way you could do a literary analysis and say this is men's literature, this is women's literature, but you can't do that either. So, there's no way we can tell. So, yeah. Okay, Christy.
Well, I don't have an answer for that very depressing conundrum, but if we move forward, we do actually get her reply, when she finally sees him again. She does sort of get like a pretty awesome speech, which a lot of women in the Bible are denied.
Yeah, we shall move on to that now. I think, is that the next one we've got? Well, what happens next, of course, is Saul has died. David is still in the wilderness. And Saul's son Ishbosheth is now king. The fighting is still going on between David's troops, because David has actually gathered more and more people about him. Ishbosheth is not a popular king. Sorry, yes, I'm just trying to think, yeah. I just wrote, yes, sorry, I'm just thinking aloud here. That I've lost my notes, and you said somebody's going to have to remind me the name of the general. It's Abner. Okay, Abner is the general of Ishbosheth's troops, and basically he deserts Ishbosheth for David, but basically he goes to David and says, I want to join you. I don't think David is quite sure whether this is, a trap or not, but he says to Abner, don't come. Basically, the next passage, the Samuel, this way into 2 Samuel now, because 1 Samuel is all about the first part of so the creation of the monarchy under Saul. Samuel 2 is all about David becoming king and being king. So Ishbosheth is now the king, and he basically, David says to him, when Abner comes, I will make a pact with you. I make one demand upon you. Do not appear before me unless you bring Michal, the daughter of Saul. Interesting. This is David doesn't say my wife. He says Michal, the daughter of Saul. Why do you think that is? Mark?
He's asserting his claim to the throne.
Yeah. Does it suggest that he has any fondness for her as a person?
No.
No. He, from his point of view, she's an asset. She's not a wife.
He even mentions how much he paid for her.
Yes. Yeah. Will you come? So David also sent messages to Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, to say, give me my wife, Michal, for whom I paid the bride price of 400 Philistine foreskins. In other words, I paid for her. She's mine. Okay. In fact, he paid 200, if you remember. I don't know if there's any significance. Only 100 are mentioned here. And I don't know if the rabbis picked up on it because I didn't follow this one up. But, you're absolutely right. He mentions the price. He's not seeing her as a wife. He's seeing her very much as a commodity. Okay. So Ishbosheth sent and had her taken away from her husband, Paltiel, son of Laish. Her husband walked with her as far as Bahurim, weeping as he followed her. Then Abner ordered him to turn back, and he went back. I find that such a sort of tragic sort of image. Clearly he loved Michal. Again, in a sense, it's the opposite. We don't know what her feelings were for him, but he clearly was very much in love with her. And this sort of sense of this man, following, weeping, until basically General says, just go home, just go home. There's nothing for you here. You can sort of see the kind of the bullying and the sort of kind of the strength of the sort of kind of, the big guys, the guys with power, as opposed to the people who don't have it, and the sort of cruelty and feeling. Mark?
It doesn't have to be that interpretation. I mean, from a guy's perspective, he might have been saying to him, I hear what you're saying, but it isn't going to change. You have to go back and get on. It doesn't have to be a bullying sort of response on Abner's part, although it could be, of course.
Fair enough. Jonathan Magnet writes on this rather nicely. I can't remember which of his books, but yeah, no, you're right. But what do you think at this point? I know some of you have read on, forget about reading on. Up to this point, how do you feel Michal would feel? Okay, Mark again.
I don't know, but if I were Michal, I'd be feeling I've had it up to here with being used as a commodity.
Yeah. Yep.
At least he's asked for her. And I mean, not very nicely, but
yes. Why did
he might be clutching at straws? If you really, lots of people do.
Possibly, yes. If she still loves him, that is possible. Francis?
But only if she still loves him, because we haven't heard anything about her feelings since David ran away.
No, that's right.
And
we're about to.
That,
yes.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, obviously,
yes.
But hearing that her husband was crying, that he had to give her up, she probably didn't have the worst time in that second marriage. So I could also see her being a little bit resentful, just, this man who I love disappeared for a few years, and then suddenly he's like, oh yeah, but I had this, now that it suits me, here right now. It's not very decent of him, is it?
No, and she could well be saying, hang on, all these years you could have sent for me. Why now?
Because she definitely would have followed him. She would have lived in the desert.
Of course. course she would. Of course she would. You know, she loved him, definitely. And, you know, why now? Why is he asking for her now? It's because he's now making an open bid for the kingship.
So Saul was right. His connection to the kingship is through her.
Absolutely, you know, and this is the only way he can lay a claim, and he's going to, and he does. I mean, you know, I know I got in trouble at Limud one year for in a class calling David a usurper. You know, the Orthodox said no. You know, he was designated by God to take this role, but he was a usurper. You know, Saul had other sons other than Jonathan. You know, there was Ishbosheth had the legitimate claim to the monarchy, and David overthrew it.
The other thing that there is parallel here is that David, when he sent to Ishbosheth, he is asking for Michal, my wife, that I paid for, etc. And which reminds me of God asking for Isaac, for Abraham to take Isaac, your son,
your only son.
etc.
All right, yes,
your only son that you loved. So in a way, I'm not so sure about the love thing. So perhaps it's not all only interest.
That's the interesting one. Yeah. Okay, so if we move on now, we're into the story. Basically, David is now king. And not only that, he has defeated the Jebusites and claiming Jerusalem as his capital. It becomes the city of David. Very significant because it's actually outside the tribal areas. One of the things that David was very successful in doing is losing the 12 tribe Amphictyony, which, you know, the 12 tribes which were sort of independent, and the idea was they'd come together to fight off a common enemy. But when there was no common enemy, what had happened was they were fighting amongst themselves. David managed to stop that and to stop rebellion against his kingship also by basically losing tribal identity, creating a new capital, and requiring the priests, for example, to come, you know, in turn. The shrines, the local shrines continued, but in turn, the priests had to come and do their stint in Jerusalem. You know, well, actually, that wasn't until Solomon building the temple, but they'd still had that sort of kind of turnaround. They did, you know, he basically managed to lose the tribal identity into the kingdom, basically the kingdom of Israel at that point. And so Jerusalem became really important. And yes, of course, the priests went there because the ark is now being moved to Jerusalem. Big thing that this is going to be its new home in this new city. And David is ecstatic about it, and gets into a sort of religious frenzy, dancing and whirling around, as we see. 2 Samuel 6:16, the ark of the Lord entered the city of David. Michal, daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and whirling before Adonai, and she despised him for it. Okay, now, why does she despise him? I missed out quite a bit. She confronts him at the end of this. David went home to greet his household, and Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "Didn't the king of Israel do himself honor today, exposing himself today in the sight of the slave girls of his subjects, as one of the riffraff might expose himself?" David answered Michal, "It was before Adonai who chose me instead of your father and all his family and appointed me ruler over Adonai's people, Israel. I will dance before Adonai and dishonor myself even more and be low in my own esteem. But among the slave girls that you speak of, I will be honored." And so to her dying day, Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children. Okay. So, comments, thoughts, ideas. Mark.
There's a lot going on in that text, isn't there?
Yeah.
She's called the daughter of Saul. You know,
Yes.
I mean, there's a real coldness going. It's like ice in that house, you know, and she refers to him as the king, you know, and of course he's dishonoring her by his, you know, gyrations and that. So she feels that she's being diminished. Her status is being diminished by this, you know, this bonkers kind of thing outside. And then, of course, he does the ultimate on her and says, you know, Adonai has made me king over, you know, in the place of your father. Yeah. So, you know, she knocks him down, he knocks her down even more. And then, of course, we end up by finding out that she never has children, which is like the ultimate thing. Absolutely. So they never sleep together again.
Yeah, absolutely. Christy.
I'm glad you said that, Mark, because I had read that as like a punishment to Michal, which I've definitely read as described as, which makes me so angry. But I love this passage. I remember reading this as a kid, that it had a really big impact on me. Although I don't think I understood. Now I read it as having very sexual overtones. I mean, how many times so Abraham tries to like sister wife off Sarah twice, you know, then it happens again. And now like finally, some fool who happens to be David gets told off for this. And I love it. I think it's disgraceful. I don't care about, oh, he's a product of his time. He can marry all of these women. No, he's a disgrace. And Michal calls him out. She absolutely calls him out. And in doing so, she foreshadows the whole Bathsheba thing. Like this absolutely is his weakness. And like a good first wife who absolutely knows what, like all of her husband's worst traits, she is absolutely calling him out. And I hope they were divorced because he does not deserve her. and like all of the wordplay of like exposing himself and honor and dishonor, and I will expose myself to whoever I please. But of course he is the man. But Mark, I love your interpretation of this, that it's because she never lets him in her bed again, that she doesn't have children. So
yes, I mean, and I mean, there's one other element to what you were saying, Mark, of course, which is when he mentions, you know, he's demeaning her by saying, you know, I am king in place of your father. And then though, when he says sort of, I will expose myself to the slave girls, they will honor me, is implying that she is less significant in his eyes than a slave girl. So
is there a sexual thing in honoring? You know, so in other words, I'll go and sleep with slave girls. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I have to say, Francis.
I also really like this interpretation much better than so because of that, because she told him off, she was cursed with having no children for all of her life.
Yeah.
I like this so much better, and it is definitely in the text.
It is.
Yeah, I think it's even more of a revolutionary act of protest, because if we're saying the only value you have as a woman is being a mother and, you know, especially giving your husband an heir, this is some serious protest, and I'm here for it.
Yeah. Yes. No, absolutely. And it's interesting because the rabbis do pick this up. I mean, there are those that do see it as a divine punishment, but there are a great many of the rabbinic interpretations which take the line that, you know, that they never slept together again. So it's you know, voluntary barrenness.
I don't like David.
Sorry, I want to be the devil advocate.
All right.
First of all, she is very degrading towards him, and he is very humanistic and democrat, right? She's
the snob.
She is definitely the snob, and she. Well, I don't know. Well, I should read the English again, but in the Hebrew, it's very clear that she's talking with him. Well, you are one of the stupid, or one of the most, I don't know, most, humble people,
Yes.
or no, it is, but it is very degrading. It's not nice. So I mean, also when I read it as a child, and also the fact that she doesn't have a child, we don't know why, right? We don't know who decided
Yeah.
not to have a child.
Well, I mean, there is that divine element too. If you're going back to the sort of matriarchal, patriarchal figures, you know, the end of the story of Rachel is she does have children, although she dies giving birth.
So Michal does not
So-
get to be a matriarch, because then Saul's line would have continued. So she's kind of like doomed by the whole politics of the situation
Yeah.
anyway. Like her second husband clearly loved her. He's like weeping behind her.
Yeah.
Why didn't they leave her with him? Then she could have had kids with him and like had
Yep.
a chance at a happy life. But no, she has to like come be his beard or his like trophy that he can't have kids with. I think it's terrible.
Francis.
Yeah, because I think that's more it rather than her being a snob. He wants her to be there already, apparently, when he brings the ark in, and he just, comes like la 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 la, the king, like approaches the city like, and she's like, seriously, for this?
And she's in a
Away from my
window,
husband for
which
this?
is the last time she saw him. He went out the
Yeah.
window.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the question is whether the way she's speaking to him at this point, which is so bitter and so angry, is the result of the way she's been sort of carted from pillar to post and his total, abandonment of her earlier. Is this a sort of, build up all that resentment that she's had, that she's talked, that's coming out here? Mark.
There's that extraordinary thing, isn't it? We're told twice that she loved him, and then finally that she despises him. There's no there's no kind of anger more than somebody who did love once and has ended.
Yes.
But kicking back slightly on what Claire said, I mean, she has status, as the daughter of a king. She may be David's wife, and she may be a sort of his power play tool for the throne, but she still has her status, and I think she's clearly conscious of that.
Yes, I mean, you have to remember that she fell in love with a David who was this simple shepherd boy, and whether she can actually ever sort of see him as a king is also a question. If that's not her picture of what a king should be.
Doesn't she see him, out of all the times I've read David's story, he's just really so full of himself and really just knocks down anything in his way to get what he wants. And I think she saw that too in him dancing in the streets in front of the ark. She was probably just totally disgusted by his behavior and what he really is, and that David probably just cares for no one except David. I mean, every weekend, sitting there, every time it's a Psalm of David, everyone's like, oh, look at this beautiful guy who plays music and writes beautiful poetry. But the reality behind David is that, excuse me, but kind of a scumbag.
How many?
Especially towards women. I mean, the way he just
I
goes
was
on the side and, oh, I see this beautiful woman bathing on a rooftop. She's going to be my next wife. I mean, it's disgusting. I know that, it was all okay back then, but it's really, it wasn't. I mean, it was never right. Anyway,
I think Claire was
sorry. Yes, I still have to defend my position. The guy was dancing because in front of God, he was dancing because he took the Aron Adonai to Jerusalem or wherever. He was happy. this girl is going and just trying to spoil him and insult him, etc. So I mean, I don't see, yes, until that point she was a tool. We can interpret it in many ways, but in this scene, I don't like Michal, sorry. She's nasty. She's like her father. She's
because
exactly
he was the one who got the
I-
ark to Jerusalem.
Yes,
love
It
it that they
wasn't
were
that
all-
the ark in Jerusalem,
Definitely.
it's that David himself got it there. Look what I did.
No,
Yes.
yeah,
Exactly,
well,
which is why he
Alright,
did
just
it
hold
in
on,
blood,
hold
right?
on.
sacred. The ark
Right.
is sacred to
dressed
all of
as a
Israel.
He's
I
so
love
far
it.
above his
He
station. Like,
didn't do
he
it.
was
He
just a
didn't do it.
bandit. He was
No,
a warlord. She's right. Like,
your
she's-
interpretation is
Okay,
that he
okay.
does
But
it.
why is he in this ifkud? Like, why is he
Sorry.
dressing like a priest? He's usurping that power, and that's a short garment. So he's also like, what do men wear under a kilt? Well, everybody knows, with David leaping around like some drunk priest or something. Like, and she rightfully puts him in his place. And he was just a bandit like a few chapters ago.
Okay, I mean, I love it that we're actually disagreeing. I think it's great. Francis wants to come in. I just want to say that, you know, the one thing that I think, there is one other element which does support you, Claire, very much, which people don't pick up on. And I haven't found the rabbis pick up on the fact this is happening in public. She has left the house. She's gone out to meet him. And that's a big no-no. I mean, you know, in a sense, you know, this is the king of Israel, and there she is sort of telling him off in front of everyone. You know?
Also, the interpretation was that he did it in order to annoy her. He didn't. So it is really clear that he's glad, he's happy, he's dancing, he's nice, he's kind. And also his explanation was very Democrat. So I'm very kind of, okay, until this point, he took wives and we don't like it. A bigamist, a traitor, he didn't love her, which is also what we say, not what is written, because on Leah, it was said that she wasn't loved, right? She is snui, etc. The text didn't say something like that. Here it says that David was happy and glad and dancing, and you are coming here and saying kind of nasty things about him. I don't agree with you. Sorry.
Okay, all right. Francis has been trying to kid him for a long time.
I mean, even if we leave Michal out of it, I think it's pretty audacious to essentially rock up in front of Jerusalem and say, I can do whatever the expletive I like because God chose me. I think that's, I don't know, I think that's pretty audacious of him, even if we leave Michal out of it and say he didn't do it to annoy her. But it does sound quite petty, I think.
It was
saying,
done.
oh no, I wasn't dancing in front of you, it was before Adonai because Adonai chose me.
First of all, it's the
I'm not sure.
Bible who is saying, no, first of all, it's the Bible which is saying that he danced in front of Adonai, not David, right? This is one thing. The other thing, how would you feel if you were happy and someone will come and say insulting things? Why are you dancing like that? You look foolish or whatever. Come on. I would be hurt. I will give back.
Let's move on.
I think David had it coming.
we are running really out of time, so I'm going to be very, very quick, I'm afraid, with the rabbinic texts, and I'm so sorry. The first part of Sanhedrin 19b is really looking at this whole question of the halakha, which becomes a big, you know, the rabbis are exercised in. So no one may marry the king's widow. It is taught, they said to Rabbi Yehuda, women appropriate for him from the house of the king. Who are they? Merab and Michal. Rabbi Yossi's students asked him, how did David marry two sisters while they were both alive? This is based on the tradition that actually Saul did give Merab to David first, then took her away, and gave her to Ahinoam. So that essentially Saul did exactly the same thing to the two sisters, which creates another dimension, which is really interesting to look at, and we don't have time to look at, is this idea that they both sisters were taken from David and given to other men. so, you know, it's a sort of, it's a rather, it's a very sort of interesting sort of issue that is brought up with that. But it goes on then that, let's see, the question is, the king, I've skipped various bits here. The Michal had 5 sons. It is written, the king took the 2 sons of Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, whom she bore to Saul, Ammoni, and Mephibosheth, and the 5 sons of Michal, whom she bore to Adriel, the Meholatite. Okay. Now, I don't know, Chris, do you want to sort of explain what the biblical passage, which I didn't put in, that about this?
Well, that's it actually. If I have this correct, they ask for 7 descendants of Saul who wronged them to create
Yes.
peace. And so David's like, cool. And this is the list of who he gives. Now,
Yes.
Sepharia lists it as Merab, but have like a huge note listing which versions
Yes.
of but it's the Masoretic text, I think, that says
Yes.
it's Michal. So does she have 5 children?
No, it
Or
isn't
are
Masoretic,
they
yes.
Merab's children and they're her nephews and
Yeah.
she raises them, and so therefore they become
Right.
attributed to her? It creates this whole problem.
All right. No, so yeah. Basically, we have here the 5 sons of Michal. The Masoretic text says the 5 sons of Merav. Okay, so these are the children who are taken. But texts are faulty. We get this all the way through the Talmud. The Masoretic text wasn't finalized probably until the 10th century. It's very late, the text that we use, that is our text. There are multiple variants that are used in earlier sources. We have the Dead Sea Scrolls. There are variants there. And if you look through the Talmud, there are a number of variants that are used that are not the same as the text that we have. And this is one of them. Our text, as we know in the Masoretic text, which is also here, is that says that Michal had no children. This text says that she does. She had 5 of them. So how do the later rabbis work it out? Essentially, Michal brought them up. Okay. You know, this is one of the problems. Didn't Saul give Michal to Adriel? He didn't give her to Adriel. It was Merab who went to Adriel. He gave her to Palti, the son of Laish, as written. Now Saul has given Michal, the daughter's wife, to Palti, son of Laish. So that the rabbis come to the conclusion that actually she brought them up, but they were not her children. Michal brought them up, but they were not actually her children. She adopted them. Okay, Mark.
What if the text is saying, in essence, that she didn't have children with David?
Yes.
That doesn't mean that she didn't have 5 kids with Palti.
No, well, that's absolutely true.
Or
but
she
didn't. Well, sorry, I'm going to shut you up here because we're very, very quickly. I want to rush to the end. She didn't, because if you look at the end of it, it is written Palti and in one place, and it's written Paltiel at the other. Rabbi Yochanan says Palti was his name. Why was he called Paltiel? Because God saved him, Pelato, from the sin being sex. What did he do? He embedded a sword between him and her and said, anyone who engages in this matter should be stabbed by this sword. So in other words, he did not sleep with her because Paltiel was a God-fearing man. He knew that she was the wife of David. And so however much he loved her, they never slept together in the physical sense, which I think is a rather sort of kind of sweet way of ending this kind of problem. You're not so sure about it, Mark. I'm going to jump right to the end now, because the one that I find quite fascinating is if you go to Eruvin 96a, we're talking here about the mitzvot aseh shebizman grama, the positive mitzvot that have to be done at a particular time. which are the ones that women are exempted from. They're not forbidden, but they're exempted from. And they're all the ones that we would like to do that we're not allowed to. Praying, studying Talmud, wearing a talit, laying tefillin, gosh, which are the other ones? Dwelling in a sukkah, shaking the lulav. Okay, those are the ones that are defined as such. Long debates within the Talmud as to why and what and where. And the Eruvin one is actually looking at whether it's possible or not to study Torah. And it says, but it was taught that Michal, the daughter of Cushi becomes a name for Saul, would don phylacteries, that's tefillin, and the sages didn't protest against her. And Jonah's wife would undertake the festival pilgrimage, and the sages did not protest against her. Doing the festival pilgrimage is interpreted as being praying, okay? The sages did not protest against Michal. It is apparent that they hold it as a positive mitzvah that is not bound by time. That's one way of doing it. But I love this idea that from the rabbi's perspective, she wore a talit and she wore tefillin. So that, you know, not only can you see her, you know, as this sort of spirited woman who stood up to David in two instances, but also a forerunner of the sort of women's rituals to today. Now, the second text that follows that is from the Jerusalem Talmud, which says the opposite. It says that she was told that she couldn't. But so, you know, you can take your pick, but we follow the Babylonian Talmud anyway. So here you have a tradition of a woman actually laying tefillin, and by inference from that, if you lay tefillin, you study Torah, you pray, because you wear tefillin when you say the morning prayers. And by inference too, it's talking about, ergo, she would study Torah. Okay. All right. All right, Christy. Yeah.
Is she the first woman to be mentioned donning tefillin?
Yes.
So then in a way, can we see her as a matriarch in a different sense, not in the giving birth, reproductive broodmare sense, but in a much more important sense?
I think you can. So your task is to go away and devise some phrases that you think that Michal would say to women today. Okay. So next week is the last one in the series when we'll be looking at Judith, which is fairly appropriate for Hanukkah. So I'll see you all then. Okay. Okay, Mark.
Thank you. Thank
Happy
you.
Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah. Bye-bye.
Yes, happy Hanukkah. Hanukkah Sameach, everyone. Yes. of course.
Excellent. Can you send me the questions that you give your students, please, Sybil, you know, to prepare for the interview at the Beit Din?
Oh, right. Yes. Are you going to go to the Beit Din?
No, but I'd like to look at the questions that we've got. I mean,
All right.
it's a long story, and I'll tell you sometime else. But yeah,
Okay.
I am preparing for it, but I'm not going now.
All right. Okay. I will dig them out. I'll certainly. I'll give them to
I'd be
you.
grateful.
Okay.
Thanks. Sorry if
All
that's
right.
not a problem.
That's not a problem.
burden.
Not a
Okay,
problem.
thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.